Welcome to Perspectives with Asima Silva. My name is Hank Stoltz, and as always, we are coming to you from the studios of WCCA TV right on Main Street in Worcester. If you were with us just a week ago, you know that we were speaking with Dr. Fazil Khan, and as you found out, he is a cardiologist, but he's also an epidemiologist. I mean, he is really someone who has been giving us some great information about the pandemic and really kind of looking at it from the perspective of where we are and where we are right here in Massachusetts as well, and what he's been seeing. If you were also with us last week, you know that at the end of the program, Asima, really, you had something that I think probably hit a lot of people and hit home for a lot of people because, 10, 11 months into this, we're at the point now where pretty much everybody and everybody's family has been touched by this in some way. Before we get back to Dr. Khan, you left us by telling us that you have been personally affected by this, that you lost your uncle, and I'm so sorry, to COVID-19.
It was eye-opening. I mean, of course, as many of our viewers, most people did take it seriously. I do take science seriously. I have a family full of doctors, and it was very surprising to me on how overworked our doctors are and how some of our resources were very restricted on. And what surprised me, as I was telling you before in our break, was that even though we had 6 to 8 doctors following my uncle's case, it was extremely hard to get information because with COVID, there's only so many nurses and so many doctors on the floor. And the fact that we couldn't help him, and it declined so fast after having expertise in our own family, watching the results and talking to the doctors directly, and it still ended up in the worst possible situation, was extremely eye-opening for me on how severe this pandemic can be and how it can really affect someone and take their lives in a very, very horrific, evil way. And it's not the same as, I don't know, I just felt like maybe it's not the same as other diseases. It happened very fast to people that, with no underlying conditions. Some people are recovering from it slowly, some people are asymptomatic, and some people just decline so fast. It was amazing. It was a life-changing experience to really realize that no matter how much expertise you can have on a subject and how careful you can be, that some things are just not in your hands. And we just need to help the healthcare system to make sure that they can help the people that really need the help and not overwhelm our healthcare system.
Well, that might be a good place to pick it up with you too, Dr. Khan, about maybe how close we actually came to overwhelming the healthcare system. And it seems as if some states, such as California, unfortunately, that did happen. We've seen countries like Italy where it seemed as if they were, making decisions about not you. Okay, maybe we can save you because it got to be so bad. But I just wanted to comment on that because you also, of course, are seeing this each and every day. What Asima was describing. You go home, you flip on the TV, and there's some number, on your TV, and it says 400,000, and you go, boy, that's horrible. But it's just a number. You hear the story that you just told about your uncle, and it becomes very personal. You're seeing it because you're in the hospital. So you're seeing how tired people are. You're seeing what the frontline workers are doing. And maybe describe that a little bit, because some of us, it's still... It's these numbers, it's these unimaginable numbers, but it hasn't hit home in the same way that it has personally, perhaps.
Yeah, that's. Thank you again for inviting me to the show, and I think your experience. I'm sorry about kind of what happened, but it's not totally untypical, because the nature of this virus and the fact that it's a novel virus and we haven't been exposed to it before, means that some of the traditions that we have around sickness and how we care for our sick are not being adhered to as much. And one of them is that the family comes in. I remember when I was younger, there would be very strict times when you could go and visit somebody in the hospital. It was between 4 and 6, and after that you had to leave. And now at the time we came to realize that having the family there is very supportive for the patient. It also gives healing to the family themselves. And the fact that this pandemic means that the people who are coming in can get exposed, or the corollary can happen. They can expose the patient, and we are seeing that too. Means that we really have had to be much more draconian about visiting times, visiting hours, and sometimes just kind of stop them altogether. And I think that, when it comes to the end of life, it really it is a shame, unfortunately, that it has to end this way. But unfortunately, we don't have a better system in place that can protect everybody. And I'll give you some examples of what's going on. So patients come in for a big procedure, they get tested now. One time we didn't have testing. Mm-hmm. Thankfully now we've managed to ramp that up so that testing is much more widely available. We test a patient, they're negative. They come in, but there's a couple of days before the procedure, and right before the procedure they get tested again, and now they're positive. And how did that happen? And then, so we start to contact trace everybody around and all the patients. And oftentimes it's been family that had come in to visit them that we feel might have brought something in from the outside, which is why we've become very, very strict about that. But sometimes what can happen is that the patient gets, the resources, as you're saying, are limited, and patients have to share rooms. Now, with COVID patients, we make the best effort we can to ensure that there's one patient in a room, negative ventilation, and so on and so forth. But, at some point where you think patients are negative, and they're both kept in a room, and then one of them somehow turns out positive, now they've exposed another patient. And if family have come in to see that patient, they've exposed a whole bunch of other people. So that is part of the reason that these very strict measures are being put in place. Right. And I think we've tried to improve communication to families as much as possible, have designated people who call families on a regular basis. But again, where your resources are being stretched so thin, it's difficult to now have, somebody who could be doing something else just on the phone, and their job is to call families all day long. Right. and give them updates. It really kind of, it has stretched the system as much as it's possible.
That was what I learned the hard way, is the limited access to your loved one who might be in the hospital with COVID. They may have a cell phone, but then you're relying on them to be awake enough, healthy enough to be able to answer the phone, put themselves on video or text.
And what Hank is bringing this to as well is the personal side of that, which you've experienced, which is not a number. Right. And I think a lot of our lives have been touched by this in some way, shape, or form. We have people in the community whose family members may have died abroad. And all of these are excess deaths that you sometimes think, would not have happened had this virus not been here. But again, I think it points to the fact that as a society, as a community, we're reaching the finish line. We really should remain vigilant for the sake of our own health and for the sake of the health of our loved ones, for the kind of experience that you had. Because people are still getting sick. People with no underlying conditions are still getting sick, and they're still dying. Right. Although in Massachusetts, where, as you said, after Thanksgiving, we really had a horrific spike in the number of cases. And again, we're kind of getting to a scary period. We're starting to get a little better now, but we can't afford any kind of misstep. Because we really, again, if you look at the ICU bed situation, I'll tell you a story that happened to me. I had a 96-year-old lady who was going to have a heart procedure that we do where we replace these valves. And she had an ICU bed dedicated to her after the procedure was done. But while we were doing the procedure, there was an emergency with a COVID patient who took her bed. So when the procedure was over, she didn't have an ICU bed to go to because the ICUs were so full. Right. And then we had to kind of look after her in that, and what the protocols are supposed to specific about where patients have to go. She couldn't go to any other place. We had to look after her in the OR for hours, which is kind of, and then there still wasn't a bed by 6 p.m. at night. And they were saying that, the staff in the cath lab might have to stay with her overnight, which would not be a safe situation. Right. But that was the kind of the pressure on the bed. Eventually, we managed to create a bed. Part of that was happening was there are also staff shortages.
How do you create a bed?
What happens is, part of it is, it's not just the bed that's the problem. It's the staffing that goes with the bed. Yes. Okay. The staffing is usually ICU level nurse staffing, which is, right now is wanted all over the country. And what happens is, it's the holiday period. Your own nurses may not be around, may be, away, or they may be sick. That when they get sick, then there's nobody who can fill that. So you try and get travelers, but all the travelers are in California because they're seeing, those rates, and they're being paid 3 or 4 times as much. So now what you have to do is scramble to get somebody to help you. But if you can get staff, you can create that bed. But that's the kind of pressure that you're under where these kinds of things happen.
That is amazing. Want to thank you for coming and doing the second show for us. And I'll just let everybody know that at the end of the first show, it was one of those where everybody said, oh, I wish we had more time to talk about the following. I wish we'd had more time to ask the following. So maybe I'll just, because of our limited time, maybe I'll just send that over to you. And I know that there were some things that you had wanted to explain me a little bit more in depth, some of the things that we had talked about with the vaccine, that you had wanted to have a little bit more time to get into. We were just trying to get to so many different subjects. Are there some things that you remember from last time that you wanted to talk a little bit more about?
Thanks for opening it up, Hank. So, I'll touch on a couple of things, if I may. Amongst them, what people who are sick but not sick enough to get into the hospital should do for themselves or for their loved ones. And then another question that you had brought up about this new variant that we're seeing, and where do we stand with that in terms of what the risks are with that? Because I believe that one of the first or second cases is here in Worcester County that we're seeing in Massachusetts. So the new variant that was first described in the UK in September, the B117 variant, basically is something that happens in these viruses. You expect that they mutate a little bit, but what this mutation has done for the virus is that it has made it more virulent. And what I mean by that is that the viral load that is carried is much higher. So you carry a lot more of it in your nares, and you're much more likely to sneeze it out, talk it out, cough it out, so on and so forth, and consequently spread it. Now, initially they were saying that although you spread it more, it's not more deadly than the regular COVID-19. But now the information that's coming out, actually just within this week, is that perhaps it is. That if you get it, you actually do get sicker than you would with the regular coronavirus, which is part of the reason why I think in the UK they've really been hit very hard. Now, there is a factor that we talk about how these things spread, and it's called the R naught. The R naught is the way that a virus kind of spreads. So, for example, an R naught of 2 would mean that a virus would spread to 2 people quite as rapidly as if it were not. So, and then that kind of is a logarithmic spread, and what that means is that from 2 you go to 4, from 4 you would go to 16, from 16 you would go to 256, that kind of thing, Yes. It spreads and here, in comparison to the regular coronavirus, it's thought to be somewhere around 1.7, which is quite significant, because from 1.7, if you square that, you're at 2.59, and from 2.59 close to 4.95. So, whereas the other one would have gone from 1 to 2 or to 3 cases, now you're at 5 and then at 25, and you're spreading much more rapidly.
And more deadlier, possibly. And
potentially more deadlier. So, this is something we really want to be very, very, very cautious about. I think that they should be, or there are new regulations that are coming in terms of restricting travel from these countries, that they have to come in with negative tests, and hopefully will be tested again when they arrive. But, there is some predictions that by March or April, if we don't get enough vaccines out, that this will become the dominant strain in the U.S.
Oh, wow. Okay.
As soon as that, in the U.S., this will become the dominant strain because of the fact that it can spread so rapidly. The fact is that it's already in the U.S.
Right.
Yeah.
We just found out in Worcester.
Yeah, exactly. This young person in their 20s is getting it out. Are they able to make enough? Like Moderna is cranking it out, and AstraZeneca's is going to come online, and Pfizer is out there. Are we worried that they aren't able to, because they're doing it for the whole world, that we're going to have enough here in the U.S., or is it more that we are worried just how quickly we can inject everybody, and that we have enough? Because you were just talking about, do we have enough ICU nurses? Do we have enough people to be able to give the vaccine?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think that the government made a contract with Pfizer where they only bought a limited supply up front. and Pfizer is supplying the whole world, as you're saying. They can only crank out so much. So there is a little bit of that. I do think that we will catch up. I do think that Moderna and Pfizer, especially being a much larger company, can start to crank it out. But the bottleneck may be how quickly we can give the vaccine. We touched on this in the last show.
Sure, yeah.
So I really do think that we really need to ramp that production up. I mean, we really do need to go to kind of these big centers like the Gillette stadiums and the Fenways and start thinking big in terms of how we can administer 5,000 vaccines a day to really catch up, because that's kind of what we're looking for, is to try and get it out to the whole population as soon as possible.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, in Worcester, because that way you're talking about these super centers. They call the senior center now like one of these super vaccination centers. I think they did about 800 first responders in the 3 or 4 days that they were open last week. Well, then we go back to the math. Worcester has 180,000 people. How long does it take me at 800 a week?
Right.
Gee, that seems like it's kind of a long time.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's kind of the impression that I've gotten, that we're I think part of what needs to happen is that the whole process has to be rethought out in terms of what you're aiming for. We should be able to double or triple that. You need more centers, more tables at the senior center, more people vaccinating, and more people kind of coming in and out as soon as possible to try and kind of wrap that, and maybe have more than one center.
Can you
identify
explain?
places.
I mean, I have heard that before we were talking about a certain amount of time being exposed to someone who may be a carrier. But now I have been told that it's within a cumulative time of 10 minutes of who might someone be a carrier for you to maybe also catch this virus. How does that translate to work, to school, when you say 10 minutes accumulative? I'm a little confused of what does that mean. Is it throughout the day? Is it within a certain amount of time? Because we're sending our kids to school, and if someone is positive, what does 10 minutes accumulative exposure time mean for a child or a teacher? I'm very confused at what that means.
Yes. I wouldn't hold on to those things with absolute certainty. What they're trying to do is to give you an approximate idea of what could happen when you're exposed to someone. So what they're saying is, look, it's not that you pass somebody in a shopping mall or in Stop and Shop and they have it and you will pick it up. It's not that kind of transmission, but essentially a somewhat prolonged transmission. Now, if somebody were, for example, for whatever reason, let's just say worst case, sneeze in your face, it doesn't need to be 10 minutes. You will get enough of that exposure to inhale it in. But what they're saying is that within an environment, there's a chance that it would spread in a 10-minute timeline, that there may be enough of the viral particles for you to inhale to get enough of the infection. That is what would be happening. Now, one of the theories about people who are asymptomatic is that they actually got a very small inoculation. So, you were not there for 10 minutes, you were there for 3-4 minutes. You picked up some very small viral particles, almost like being immunized, and you got a very small inoculation. But it turns out that and they do get a viral response. Now, the interesting thing is there's been very, very few cases described around the world, like under 10 cases of people getting reinfected. And this is another scary thing.
That was going to be my other question
in
about
terms
reinfection.
of kind of where we go. Because it seems like if you get a very mild response, very mild infection, you may not mount enough of an antibody response to if you get re-exposed to fight it off completely. The vaccine does that for you, by the way. It's designed to do that, which is why you're seeing 80% after the first dose, and after the second one, 95%, like we spoke about last time, of a response. But one of the scary things that we're going to be left with, that unfortunately is an unknown, is how long will this immunity last? We know with the influenza virus, we have to be immunized every year. And even with that, what happens is it gives us immunity through the winter, and then the immunity wanes if you get your shot too early in the fall, let's say you get it towards the end of the summer, chances are that towards the middle of the winter, your immunity might have already started to go down with influenza. With this, we're hoping that it's going to be longer. Our prayer is that it's going to be lifelong, but we don't know. We don't know what the answer is going to be, and whether this is now going to be, hey, along with your influenza, you're going to have to get a coronavirus shot every year. When we, we're going to have to learn through science in terms of where that takes us.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's maybe with our 5 or 6 minutes left here too. Just what do you see for the next year, and then what do we see? Are we going back every year now to get our vaccine, or is this a one-time deal? And once we've immunized the country, we've immunized the country.
One thing that will definitely happen is that once everyone is immunized, the rates will go down to a level where hopefully, that any reimmunization does not have to happen quickly. But we don't know, as I was just saying, we just don't know what's going to happen a year from now. I think the people who are getting immunized now, maybe a year from now, will have a study which will look at what are the antibody levels at that point. And if they're still high, that means you have immunity and we may be good and we may be a one and done deal. If they're non-existent, then we have a problem. And then we have to say, okay, is this going to rear itself up again or not? Because, you can almost think about it as, those little blocks that you have that are lined up and you drop one and then they all start dropping.
Dominoes?
Dominoes, sorry. If you take out a couple of dominoes, it won't keep spreading. So the vaccine will take those dominoes out and hopefully will break it. But if it restarts beyond where you started, the dominoes may start falling again. And that kind of thing is what we kind of need to learn as we go forward. And we don't have those answers yet. But the answer that we do have is that the vaccine works when your opportunity comes up. Please line up to get it as soon as possible, because not only will that save you, it will also start to save the rest of the country over time.
I've heard a rumor, or people believe, that if you are infected and you still recover, but getting infected again with maybe another strain makes you sicker or more vulnerable. Is that true?
So again, the number of cases of people who have gotten reinfected is vanishingly small.
Okay.
But it does tell you that the immunity can wane. Now the question was, it seems that the pattern that is emerging in people who got reinfected was that they got a very mild infection the first time around. They didn't get a rip-roaring, robust kind of big-time infection. They got a very mild one. And so it does seem that the second time around, they may have gotten sicker for a variety of whatever the immune system did or however the immune system reacted to it. It does seem that the second time that's what happened. But again, those are around the world, a number of case reports.
Okay.
So all that it's pointing to is there is a chance that immunity could wane. That's kind of the main thing. I wanted to just touch on one other piece, which was, what do you do if you're sick and you're in one of those vulnerable groups, but not sick enough to get infected, to get admitted to the hospital? Because that's kind of it's a rarefied group. And there are medications that are available. These are the kind of medications, when they say, hey, Trump got this, or Rudy Giuliani got this. What are they talking about? This is a little bit of what they're talking about. They're talking about these monoclonal antibodies that are available. They are available in Worcester, at UMass, and at other sites around Massachusetts, depending on where you live. One of them is called Regeneron.
I've heard of that one.
Yeah.
One of my family members had to get that.
Yes. Bemlinivab is the other one. So there's two of them that are available. And essentially the criteria are, if you're over 65 years of age, you pretty much qualify. If that age group is kind of a cutoff. So if you're over 65, you have coronavirus, you pretty much qualify for this. And what I'm finding is that not enough people are getting it, although it's available. Or you're younger than 65, you're old, but older than 55, and you have heart disease, you have COPD, or you have hypertension, you would still qualify for this. Or your BMI, your overweight is above 35. So if your BMI, which is your height and weight kind of ratio, is over 35, you would qualify. Or you have diabetes, you have chronic kidney disease, or you are immunosuppressed in some way. So you're either on medications that cause immunosuppression, or you've had cancer or cancer therapy, and you get the coronavirus, you would qualify. So those groups of people, if they get it, now the medicine works best if it's given early. So, as soon as possible, but definitely within 10 days. So, if you've got coronavirus and now it's been 2 weeks, it's not gonna work for you.
Right.
And its efficacy will wane kind of over time. But if somebody gets it and they're sick, but they're not desatting, their saturations are okay, they're not getting terrible fevers that would kind of mean that they need to be admitted to the hospital, they're the kind of person who should be evaluated for this because they might kind of benefit. And there are groups of younger kids between the age of 12 and 17 who might also qualify if they're here we look at a BMI of above the 85th percentile, or they have sickle cell disease, or they have some kind of congenital heart defect. If your children have any of these kinds of issues, a neuro developmental kind of problem, or they have severe asthma, then again you should ask your doctor as to whether they get COVID. You should ask your doctor about them. Children younger than that, they tend to get very mild COVID. They don't tend to have a problem. They tend to recover pretty easily. So they are not really in these categories.
At the end of all of this, are we going to have the information that we need? And is the world cooperating on this to give doctors the information that you need so that the next 100 years from now somebody will hopefully handle it a little bit better?
I'll tell you, this has been a great time for science and for cooperation in that way, because one of the reasons, I think we touched on this in the last episode, was that we were able to produce how were we able to produce the vaccine so quickly? And what happened was that there's scientists in Australia and the early people in China who got infected, and the people in Australia published this and allowed anybody to copy it. The RNA of the vaccine was codified or decodified and published, and said, hey, if anybody wants to use this anywhere around the world, this is what it is. You're welcome to use it. Otherwise, usually, something like that is copyrighted and, it's patented,
right.
and, you have to pay them this and pay them that, to get it. So these people in Australia immediately put it out and said, here, this is what it is. And then the BioNTech was able to take that and say, we have technology that's ready to go, and we can produce a vaccine around this by coating it with lipid. So I think that this has been an example of how, when we cooperate around the world, we can really kind of improve health, and we hope that we continue to build on this as we go forward.
That is great. We've run it right up to the last second again.
Last seconds. So again, I would like to thank Dr. Faisal Khan for joining us. We had so many more questions. We had to continue our conversation with him. Hopefully we will be inviting him again, but on a better note, when we see more progress about defeating this virus. And I hope you guys join us, and hopefully this was very informative for you also, as well as for myself. And please join us again for our next episode with Perspectives with Asima Silva.